Thank you, Jack, for that introduction. I just want to start off right away by saying that I was not involved in the Spring Hill mine disaster, nor am I responsible for the Frank slide. I do believe, however, that what we are, what I am, we're all a product of our environment, and that what we've become is from what we've learned. And I was born and raised in BC, and actually came from a small town called Ladner, which is basically a farming and fishing community. And I learned at a very early age that children basically are sadistic. All of my friends were. Being somewhat plump and perhaps slower than the rest of them, I was the object very often of ridicule. Of course, that was only my friends. People that didn't like me weren't quite so friendly. I stayed in Ladner until I was 12 years old and could no longer stand it. My family moved to Germany. My father was in the army, and I was an army brat and had to go. We stayed there for 2 years and came back to a very warm welcome in Kingston, Ontario, which is the prison capital of Canada. We stayed there for a year. The winter did us in, and my father had to leave the army, and we moved back to Ladner, which was still full of fishermen's and farmers' children who were still as sadistic, only somewhat older, and able to be a little more efficient in the way that they tormented you. I learned from that society is composed of the ins and the outs, the outcasts, and I wanted to bring an end to that. I'm a strong believer in anarchy, and I believe in working from within, so I joined the federal government. I'd just like to leave you with one thought, and that's something that I've learned as I've traveled around the world, and that is, no matter where you go, there you are. Thank you. Because by definition, it's supposed to make you feel good. I probably wouldn't feel good about it. I also have a monograph. Breathe, right?
You definitely need new shoes.
That's you know what a good pair of shoes costs?
Yes, I do. And you can't afford not to get some. Now, are you a person of many, many clothes, or just a few clothes, or?
Oh, many.
You have many. Okay, because unless you have many, I would not go into this color tone of jacket for you at all. It's not impactful or powerful, and it looks like it's a little tricky to work with. There's an outness here with the colors. The shirt doesn't quite go. I mean, you could rationalize it because it does indeed match this little tiny thread in your jacket right there. But the overall effect is not a pleasing harmony or blendedness. This is the color of the jacket that you would wear cream with, but I question whether cream is a color that looks good on you. So this jacket is, see now, let's just take this off. This shirt and tie combination will be 1,000% better with one of the navy blues. Let's just use this one again. See, that works a lot better. Another possibility would be this darker taupe. No, that's not it either. But something more on the cool tones, because what this is a cool, dusty brown that doesn't complement the creamy goldenness of that jacket. So
anything I could wear with that jacket?
Probably a white shirt.
A white shirt?
Yeah, an all-white shirt would be a lot better, and then definitely add some light back in with the tie. A white shirt and a tie with lots of dark blue and maybe a little bit of gold and white in the stripe. Okay?
Okay.
Let's see. The tie is fine. It's nicely tied. Other than that, I think color for you would be a phenomenally useful thing to get a handle on.
You should see me in a three-piece.
Oh
yeah. But I just didn't want to look the same as everyone else.
Well, good for you. Rip us off, why don't you?
Rip us off?
Anytime you're ready.
Thank you. I should have done this first. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to talk about my family. I think that looking at me, and I'm dressed in my power outfit today, you would probably think that I come from a fairly normal family. I'm normal looking myself. And in actual fact, I'm quite odd, and the rest of my family is a little bit odd. And I'd just like to go through the process that ended up with all of us being odd. Started, of course, with my grandparents. I had 4 of them, sort of the standard number that most people have. Some people do have more. All of my grandparents were English, from England. One set of them moved to Saskatchewan in the early 1900s as pioneers and lived in a dirt house, which I think is sort of the basis for all of the oddness. Not many people live in dirt houses anymore. My grandparents, all of them separately, had children who became my aunts and uncles, and their families they had large families, living in farming communities. You want to have lots of children so that they can go out and work the fields for you. So I have lots of aunts and uncles there, and of course, if my parents weren't my parents, they would be my aunts and uncles. I had come from. I've got other aunts and uncles here that aren't really aunts and uncles. Just when my dad was traveling, I'd have Uncle Ralph. Of course, when my mom was traveling, I'd have Auntie Sue. Anyhow, my mother was born in a town in the prairies in Saskatchewan called Livelong, which is sort of an inappropriate name for that town because it no longer exists. The road just sort of widens and narrows again. My mother has worked for the Bank of Commerce for quite a few years, until just recently she has sort of taken on a position with the Solicitor General, actually with the Correctional Service, and she'll be spending 4 to 6 years in Kingston. My dad was born and raised in Kelowna, BC, in East Kelowna, and his father was a poor, non-orchard owning person. They worked in orchards, they worked in the packing houses, and they didn't have a lot of money. And this really affected the kind of person that my father is. He remembers very clearly their times during the Depression, and from what I can gather from him and his brothers, their major source of entertainment fell into two areas. They lit fires in the spring and summer, and burnt down things. And in the winter, when the weather was colder, they did actually have electricity in their house, and they would gather together on the one brass bed that they all slept in, and take the light bulb out of the socket next to the bed, and lick their finger and stick it in it, and see who would travel the furthest across the room. My mother and father met and married in 1955. About 8.5 months. I've worked it out, and it's almost 9 months before I was born. Not a lot that's really remarkable about me. Actually, I forgot to tell you about my dad. He's sort of an amateur philosopher, and he's tried to imbue within me some of his philosophies of life. And I remember when I was 4 years old, he took me aside and he said, "Frank, I'm going to teach you a lesson." So imagine a chubby little sort of cherub, about this high. He said, "I'm going to teach you a lesson." I said, "Okay, Dad." He says, "Climb up this stepladder. I want you to stand on the top step." So I climbed up to the top, sort of wobbling on the top of the ladder. I was a little frightened. And he said, "Now I want you to jump off that ladder, and I'm going to catch you." And I said, "Well, I'm afraid of heights. I'm afraid of being hurt. I don't want to jump." He said, "No, trust me. Jump and I'll catch you." So I jumped, and he looked down at me and he said, "Frank, I want you to remember this, that you can never, ever trust anyone." And that sort of stayed with me right from my earliest moments. My sister Janice was born somewhat as somewhat of a surprise to my parents, I think, 9.5 months after I was born. And we were very close in age and, of course, very competitive. My sister Janice turned out to be the black sheep of the family, and we had a lot. I think that was caused by the sibling rivalry that we experienced as children. I remember we used to fight terribly. She, one time when she was 7 years old, she attacked me with a bread knife, and of course the scars don't show. She graduated from sort of minor assault on me to trafficking in drugs when she was in high school. This is all very serious. She was, when she was in grade 10, I remember her walking around the school. We went to the same high school, of course. Walking around the high school with a paper bag full of a pound and a half of marijuana wrapped in individual baggies. And she was dealing in the girls' washroom. I thought that it was odd that none of her teachers noticed the glazed eyes or the, the constant nervous tics, or questioned what was in the paper bag that she held onto so tightly, or where she got such a nice car. Janice actually has straightened out since then. She's a very nice and normal person now. She went through a bit of a phase where she left home and lived back east as a hippie with a gentleman named Jack the Bear, who I met once, and he weighed 320 pounds and was about 6'8", and was all hair and beard. Frightening person. He had spent some time in prison, and he had actually one time been a speed freak, and all his bones were brittle, and he moved like this to crack them and loosen them up. During that period, Janice became a vegetarian, and I was really at first not sure about how to deal with a vegetarian in my family. We're all fairly strong meat eaters. I myself have become a vegetarian since then. But Janice sort of started off, and she explained to me that there's sort of a stratification within vegetarians. The top level is the lacto-ovo vegetarian. Those are vegetarians that eat eggs and milk. And then there are vegans who eat no milk or eggs. Then there are fructans who eat things that can be picked without killing the plant. And then there are breatharians who actually exist, and they believe that all your nutrients can be gained from the atmosphere. So if you see someone who does never eats anything and is breathing shallowly, it's probably a breatharian who's on a diet. My brother Richard was born in 1960. He, in high school, had a great interest in automobiles and auto mechanics and engines. Probably started by my father, who taught him a little bit about small engine mechanics and principles of electricity. One time when my father was repairing the family lawnmower before a summer's mowing, he got my brother out. He had trouble. He tuned it up. He couldn't get it going. He said, "Richard, I want you to hang on to this to see if we're getting a spark." So my brother reached down and hung on to the end of the spark plug wire. And my father went, "Reef," and my brother went. And that experience interested him in engines. Richard's going to law school now. I should point out that of all the 5 children in my family, I'm the only one that is gainfully employed. Janice is a housewife, Joy is a housewife, Richard is in law school and probably will never be gainfully employed, and Jillian is still in school. My next sister, Joy, was born a year and a half after Richard, and see that there's quite a spread. 6 years, you don't really get to know your sibling that well when you're that far apart. All I know about her is that I think she finished high school. She got married and started producing babies, and she hasn't stopped producing babies. She does it quite well. And I think she's going to continue. Jillian is my youngest sister. I think of her almost as my first child, because I was, added up, 16 years old when she was born. And I spent a lot of time looking after her while Mom and Dad were traveling. That basically is my family. I'm very proud of them. They're a unique group of individuals, and they're people that are worth knowing. And I'm glad to be one of them. I think that I might have a little bit of time left. I know this is a fairly complicated and technical subject. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask. If not, I'm done. Thank you.
Frank, take one. Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon.
How are you feeling?
Fine, thanks.
You won't after this interview.
You sure?
Why are you wasting so much time here? Why aren't you in your office working?
Well, I don't feel that I'm really wasting time here. I'm in theory gaining something beneficial that will allow me to do better at what I do.
Let me key on in theory. In theory, you may be doing better. In practice, can you see this translating into practical benefits for you or for the taxpayer?
Yes, but in a way I feel that my skills were adequate when I came into this course, and it was more a matter of brushing up on them. As far as the taxpayers' money, I think they're getting a good deal.
Mm-hmm. Let me pick up on some of the items you've listed on your questionnaire here. Tenacity, physical fitness, sensitivity. These rank low on your list of priorities. Why? Sensitivity, isn't that important?
Sensitivity is a very important thing, and actually I like to think that I'm a very sensitive individual. But in relation to the other things that were named there, the other choices that were given, and putting them into the perspective of a business environment, sensitivity isn't always something you can afford to have.
I see. Are you enjoying your holiday this week?
It's not really a holiday, is it?
I suppose not. Do you people, are you people as careful with the public purse as you ought to be? I'm thinking of people paid 50 grand a year. I'm thinking of free briefcases for the staff. I'm thinking of junkets, seminars like this.
Free briefcases. Well, I wish that I would get one. The one that I have, I pulled out of a garbage can.
Is that a fact? Is that a rumor, an unfounded rumor, that the briefcases are free?
I imagine some civil servants do get provided briefcases when they're required to trudge around carrying heavy loads of government paperwork. That's not something that I do terribly often. Most of the time I spend in the office slaving over my desk.
Let me ask you a question related to cost efficiency. Is it cost efficient to have furniture made in Matsqui shipped to Edmonton, then shipped back for use here? Seems a squandering of public funds.
It may not be terribly efficient, no, but...
What could be the possible purpose?
What could be the possible purpose? It does keep the inmates occupied. It does give them something to do.
Why not store them here in Vancouver? After all, they're used here, are they not?
That's true. One of the reasons that they aren't stored here in Vancouver is that the cost of keeping an entire warehouse in a very expensive city, and also staff in a very expensive city, is prohibitive. It may be, in fact, cheaper to keep them in Edmonton and ship them back and forth than to employ people out here.
I see. You know, why are your regulations, rules, and so forth printed in French as well as English? It seems redundant to me that people in British Columbia should require service in French.
Well, Canada does have 2 official languages, and just as a matter of course, by law, everything that is official has to be printed in 2 languages.
Let me take you into the political arena. We have 2 serious problems today. Unemployment